My name is Kendra Stanton. I'm 34 years old, and I price disasters for a living. Last July, my brother put his two children in a taxi and sent them to my house, a house I had quietly sold 4 months earlier. I had told him no 3 times, in writing. Darren sent one final text, switched his phone to airplane mode, and walked up a cruise ship gangway with a drink voucher in his hand. The taxi carried my niece and nephew through a summer thunderstorm and dropped them on a stranger's porch. The man who answered the door made one phone call. What that call set in motion, the squad car, the caseworker, the handcuffs at the Atlanta airport, and the piece of paper my own mother eventually slid across her kitchen table, was something my family never saw coming. Honestly, neither did I. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share stories about family, boundaries, respect, and the quiet strength it takes to hold your ground when the people you love push hardest. If you know has ever been treated like the beginning of a negotiation, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. And be sure to subscribe, because you're going to want to hear how this ends. I work on the 19th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Atlanta for a company called Meridian Assurance Group. My job is simple to explain and difficult to do. I look at things people love, a house, a bridge, a business, and calculate exactly how they could fail. Storms, lawsuits, bad wiring, terrible decisions. I put a number on catastrophe before it arrives. Clients pay serious money for that. My family got the same service for free for 3 decades, and they never realized they were my biggest account. I was the keeper of the spare keys. I was the midnight airport pickup. I was the emergency loan with no due date, and the guest room that was never requested, only announced. When my father's transmission died, my savings fixed it. When Darren's card was declined at a pharmacy, mine didn't. I handled Grandma's insurance appeal, my mother's property tax dispute, and every Thanksgiving turkey since I was 25. That wasn't exactly love. It was infrastructure. Nobody thanks a bridge. They just drive across it and become very offended the day it charges a toll. Here's the thing about being the reliable one. Reliability eventually gets mistaken for consent. Say yes enough times, and your yes stops being a gift. It becomes a standing order. And in my family, no was never an answer. It was an opening bid. Say it. And the negotiation simply began. Softer voices, guilt wrapped in concern, and my mother's favorite speech about what families do for each other. I'll be fair. Nobody ever physically twisted my arm. I kept catching them because catching things made me feel needed. And for a long time, being needed was the closest I ever came to feeling truly seen. It took 2 children on a stranger's porch to teach me the difference between those 2 things. The rules of my family were never written down. They didn't need to be. I learned mine at 12, standing at the front door with my brother's inhaler in my hand because Darren, 15 and grinning, had forgotten it again on game day. My mother kissed my forehead and called me her little manager. It was the nicest thing she said to me that year. Her name is Paula, and she learned those rules from her own family. She had a younger brother, my Uncle Teddy, and she carried him like luggage for 40 years. Rent, bail money once, 3 Christmases, where his gifts came straight off her card. She told those stories the way other women show off wedding china. I never once let him fall, she'd say. What she never mentioned was that Teddy never learned how to land on his own. My father, Frank, was an electrician for 30 years and silent for most of them. He believed peace meant agreeing with my mother half a second faster than an argument could start. And then there was Darren. Darren was the fun one, quick with a joke, first on the dance floor, the kind of charm that made waitresses forgive him. He never carried anything heavy for long, because every time he reached for the weight, 4 hands beat him to it, and 2 of those hands were mine. He grew into a 37-year-old man who had never once heard a no that actually stuck. That's not just a personality. That's a diet. You become what your family feeds you. They fed Darren rescue after rescue, while they fed me the word responsible like it was dessert. People ask why I kept picking up the tab for a grown man. For a long time, the honest answer was simple: for bedrooms and an address. My house had become the place where everyone in my family assumed the door would always be open, the lights would always be on, and Kendra would always say yes. They were about to learn the house can be sold, a door can close, and a no can finally mean exactly what it says. I bought 4128 Maplewood Court in Smyrna when I was 28 for $238,000 after 6 brutal years of saving. The first evening, I mowed the lawn myself just to feel the grass beneath my shoes. That house was my proof that I existed as a person and not just as a function. For about a year it was mine. Then my mother asked for a key for emergencies. Darren copied the key for convenience. Soon the guest room became the kids' room, and my Saturdays became unofficial drop-off windows. Nobody scheduled anything with me anymore. My backyard hosted 3 birthday parties I only learned about when I saw the invitations. Every time I protested, I got the same soft answer. It's family. Last November, Darren and Brianna's water heater flooded their apartment. That part was real. Somehow, though, the repairs took 9 days, and those 9 days landed exactly over Thanksgiving. 5 people moved into my house. I cooked for 11, slept on my own couch, and discovered that my study had become a gift-wrapping station. On day 6, I quietly said I needed my house back by the weekend. My mother didn't even look up from her coffee. A house that big for one person? God gave you extra, so you could share. Everyone laughed. Not cruel laughter. Worse, comfortable laughter. The kind of family makes when the arrangement works perfectly for everyone except the person paying for it. I stood in my own kitchen, holding a pan I'd bought for a house I'd bought, and finally understood that I didn't own the place in any way that mattered. They had annexed it. Somewhere between the 9th load of someone else's laundry and sleeping on my own sofa under my own roof, my anger burned down into something quieter and far more useful. I started doing math. In January, I called my friend Terry, a realtor with a gift for discretion, and said the words out loud for the first time. I want to sell. Off market. No sign in the yard. She didn't ask why. Within 3 weeks, she had a buyer. His name was Colonel Darnell Reeves, retired United States Marine Corps, 61 years old, with 32 years of service behind him and 4 years of widowhood behind that. He wanted a quiet street and a porch that faced east. He made a clean offer close to asking, and we signed in mid-March. $412,000. Keys in an envelope. My whole secret in a manila folder. I moved into a condo 25 minutes away and left an entire life behind. I told my family the house was getting work done. Roof repairs, plumbing, mold remediation. I kept it vague and boring, which is the best camouflage there is. Nobody checked. Of course nobody checked. You don't inspect a resource. You simply assume it will always be there. Like water, like weather, like me. My mail was forwarded. My Sundays happened at my parents' place in Marietta, neutral ground. Months passed, and not one member of my family noticed that I no longer lived at the address they'd been using like a hotel. At the closing table, Colonel Reeves asked me exactly one question that wasn't on a form. Anything I should know about the house. I looked at the stranger with his steady hands and flag pin, and I told him the truest thing I owned. My family believes this house belongs to them. If anyone ever shows up, you don't owe them anything. He held my eyes for a moment, then nodded once. Understood. I drove back to Decatur feeling weightless, like I'd finally moved my life out of a flood zone. I should have known better. It's my job to know better. Risk doesn't disappear. It just changes shape more slowly than we do. Spring was the first season of my adult life that truly belonged to me. I drank coffee on my little balcony on Sunday mornings and heard nothing but birds and my own thoughts. I registered for the July certification exam, the last box to check before Meridian promoted me to Director of Risk, a title I'd been quietly working toward for 9 years. At night, I studied while my cat, Actuary, slept on top of the practice tests. And I want to be clear about something, because it matters. I didn't abandon those children. Zoe was 9, all elbows and observation, the kind of kid who watched adults the way I watched balance sheets. Caleb was 6 and went everywhere with a plastic dinosaur named Bruce. I saw them almost every Sunday at my parents' house. I brought snacks. I helped with homework. I listened when Zoe talked about school and let Caleb explain Bruce's latest adventure in painstaking detail. I love those kids. What I had stopped doing was allowing their parents to use that love as a permanent reservation on my life. I thought I'd finally separated the two. I was wrong. I just hadn't yet seen how far Darren was willing to go when the word no finally became real. I braided Zoe's hair and lost chess games to her on purpose, then lost a few that I definitely hadn't meant to. She kept a shoebox filled with her dad's losing scratch-off tickets. She called it my collection, and she said it so matter-of-factly that nobody but me seemed to hear what it meant. A 9-year-old was already keeping records on her father. I had left a building, and I had left a job I'd never applied for, but I hadn't left those kids. That distinction was the whole point, even though I didn't know yet how expensive it would be to prove. May was quiet. Early June was quieter. I remember thinking cautiously, the way you look at a clear sky during hurricane season, that maybe the new arrangement had finally settled. Maybe distance had accomplished what confrontation never could. Then, in the middle of June, my phone lit up with Darren's name. My brother never called just to talk. He called the way invoices arrive. He didn't say hello. He said, "Guess who's going to the Bahamas?" And then it all came out in one shiny stream. An anniversary cruise, 7 days, leaving July 12th, some deal Brianna had found that was about to expire, for $1,800, non-refundable, already booked. I remember noticing the order of those words. Already booked. The plan existed. I was simply being notified of my role in it. "So the kids will stay with you," he said. "You barely have a life anyway." He laughed when he said it. He always laughed when he said things like that, as though turning an insult into a joke meant I wasn't allowed to object. I looked at the calendar on my wall. My certification exam was July 15th. My quarter-inch storm models were due that same week. And underneath those facts sat a bigger one, the one I'd been practicing all spring. I said no. Just that. No cushion. No apology. No offer to find a sitter. No explanation longer than necessary. Those were the rituals I had always performed before, as though my no needed a paragraph of supporting evidence before it could be considered valid. The silence on the line had a strange texture, like a machine that had jammed on a coin it didn't recognize. Then Darren laughed again. "You always say that first," he said, as casually as if we'd already negotiated the rest. "It's fine. We'll talk." He hung up, cheerful. He genuinely wasn't worried, and suddenly I understood why. In 37 years, the word no had never once cost him anything. Why would he believe in it? You don't believe in rain that has never touched you. I sat there with the phone warm in my hand, listening to my own pulse, and made myself a promise that sounded very small, but turned out to be enormous. This time, no was going to mean something, even if I had to hold it with both hands. What followed was 10 days of the family pressure machine, every piston firing. My mother called first. "Family shows up, Kendra. I raised you better than whatever this is." My father didn't call, which was its own kind of message, because his silence always parked itself on her side of the driveway. Aunt Renee texted a praying hands emoji, followed by the word selfish, spelled out in full. Brianna, bless her, sent me a spa itinerary with a note that said, "We so needed this." And that's when I realized, with a small chill, that she wasn't pressuring me at all. She genuinely believed it was settled. Someone had told her it was settled. I answered the only way a risk analyst knows how, clearly, calmly, and in writing. On June 26th, I texted Darren, "I am not available to watch the kids from July 11th through July 19th. Please arrange childcare." On July 1st, after another round of phone charm, I said it again, longer this time, with my exam date spelled out. On July 5th, I sent the third and final version, the one I could recite in my sleep, the one a detective would later read back to me in a voice without a trace of music in it. "I will not be watching Zoe and Caleb. Do not plan around me. Please arrange licensed childcare. This is my final answer." His entire reply was a thumbs-up emoji, one yellow thumb floating beneath a paragraph he clearly hadn't read. Then nothing. 6 days of nothing. No calls. No guilt casseroles. No messages from Mom. I told myself the machine had finally accepted the answer. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But somewhere beneath that relief, the part of me that prices disasters for a living was already asking the question I didn't want to hear. What happens when someone who has never respected your boundaries finally realizes you mean them? The coin. But I'd grown up in that house. and some animal part of me knew better and kept pacing. In my family, silence was never peace. Silence was inventory. Before we get to that Saturday morning, let me ask you something. Has your family ever treated your no like the opening bid in a negotiation? How many times did you have to repeat it before they finally heard you? Twice. 10 times. 30 years. Tell me in the comments, because I read every one. And if this story already feels like your story, hit subscribe, because you're going to want to see what a thumbs up emoji looks like inside a police file. Saturday, July 12th, arrived wearing a storm. The forecast had been growling all week. A slow gray system settled over North Georgia, the kind that turns I-285 into a car wash. I didn't care. Saturdays before the exam ran on lockdown rules. Coffee at 7, phone in the kitchen drawer, 6 hours of practice problems at my little desk, while my cat, Actuary, supervised from the windowsill. It's the only way I study. You can't price catastrophe with a phone chirping at you. So when the rain started tapping against the glass around 9, I was deep in flood zone actuarial tables, feeling, God help me, peaceful. At noon, I closed the laptop, stretched, and opened the drawer. The phone came alive in my hand like something caught. There was a text from Darren, stamped 7:41 that morning. Kids are in a cab to your place. Boarding now. You're the best, sis. Airplane mode till Nassau. Then a missed call from Brianna's phone at 8:12. Then a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Then 2 missed calls, 40 minutes apart, from a number my caller ID had tagged with a label that emptied my lungs. Cobb County Police. I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen and the home none of them had ever seen, and read the text twice more, hoping it would rearrange itself into something survivable. A cab to my place. Except Darren didn't have my place. He had a memory of my place. He had the only address for me that had ever existed in his universe, because it had never once occurred to him to ask whether my life had moved on. The rain got louder. I pressed play on the voicemail, and a calm, unhurried man's voice I'd heard exactly once before, at a closing table in March, began to speak. I know what happened that morning the way an analyst knows anything, through records, statements, and the account of the one adult in that house who told the truth. At 6:50 a.m. in their kitchen in Ole, Brianna asked Darren the question that should have ended everything. Did Kendra confirm? She never answered my text about the spa. And my brother, zipping a suitcase, said, She's in. She always is. Simple as that. He wasn't lying the way criminals lie. Sweating, calculating, watching for an opening. He was lying the way weather happens, assuming the world would simply shape itself around his need, because it always had. The rideshare app was the first thing that told him no. Unaccompanied minors weren't permitted, and the account would be flagged if he tried. So he called a cash outfit, City Star Cab, and a driver named Gus pulled up at 7:35. Darren handed him $80 and a promise. Their aunt's at the house. She's expecting them. The older one knows the way. He hugged his kids. I believe he even meant it. Zoe had her backpack and her hand-me-down phone for emergencies. Caleb had his backpack and Bruce the dinosaur. And here's the detail I keep returning to, the one the detective would later underline in her report without comment. The text to me, Kids are in a cab to your place. Went out at 7:41. The cab had left at 7:38. He informed me 3 minutes after the doors closed and the wheels were already rolling. Then he went dark for a week. That's not forgetting to check. That's making sure the answer can't matter. Even a thumbs-up guy knows the difference between asking and announcing. His flight to Orlando pushed back from the gate at 9:05. By then, his children were standing in the rain in front of a door that no longer opened for anyone named Stanton. Zoe told me about the ride herself weeks later, in the flat voice she uses for things that scare her. The cab smelled like pine air freshener. Caleb made Bruce walk along the window ledge and narrated the puddles. The rain came down somewhere past the interstate junction, first a drum, then a roar, and Gus turned the wipers up and asked, You kids sure your aunt's home? Zoe said yes, because her dad had said yes, and 9-year-olds run on their father's certainty, the way houses run on wiring you can't see. Children remember the details adults think don't matter. Zoe recognized the turn onto Maplewood before the GPS announced it. She knew the magnolia on the corner, the blue mailbox, and the backyard where the swing still hung, because I'd installed it for her myself 2 summers earlier. "This is it," she said, but her stomach did something she didn't have a word for, because the porch furniture was wrong, and there was a little flag beside the door that hadn't been there before. Children notice everything, and somehow they're believed about almost nothing. Gus pulled the backpacks from the trunk. The rain flattened their hair during the 10 steps from the curb. That hard Georgia rain that can soak a child before a grown-up even gets an umbrella open. Zoe rang the bell to my house. Through the glass, she saw a shape approaching that was too tall and moved too straight. Behind her, the cab's brake lights were already smearing red down the wet street. Gus saw the front door beginning to open, saw an adult standing in the frame, close enough for his cash arithmetic, and pulled away into the storm. The door opened all the way. A tall man with close-cropped gray hair looked down at 2 dripping children, standing on his welcome mat. It wasn't their Aunt Kendra. It was nobody they had ever seen in their lives. Caleb, 6 years old, solved the situation the way 6-year-olds do. He asked the only question that mattered. "Where's our Aunt Kendra?" Colonel Darnell Reeves, 61, retired after 32 years in the Marine Corps, looked at the wet children, then at the empty street, and went straight into triage mode. Later, he would tell me his first 3 thoughts in order: get them dry, get their names, and get a responsible adult on the phone. He brought them beneath the porch roof, and returned with 2 towels, and, for reasons Caleb still talks about, a sleeve of graham crackers. Then he ran what he called a roll call, kneeling on one knee, keeping his voice level as he asked their names and ages. "Where's your dad?" Zoe, 9 going on 40, gave him the truth. "Dad and Mom went on a boat. Dad said Aunt Kendra lives here. Aunt Kendra isn't answering. This used to be her house, because that's her swing in the back." She called her father from her little phone while the colonel watched. Straight to voicemail. The ocean already had him, or airplane mode did. She tried her mother. Voicemail again. She didn't know her grandparents' number by heart, because hardly anyone memorizes numbers anymore. And she didn't have mine, because her phone had been set up by her father. And you can guess how much thought he'd given to backup contacts. The colonel stood on the porch of the house I'd sold him and remembered the strange thing I'd said at closing. "My family believes this house belongs to them. If anyone ever shows up, you don't owe them anything." He looked at Zoe wringing the rain out of her sleeve and filed that sentence where it belonged. It was a rule about adults. He didn't owe the grown Stantons a single thing. What he owed 2 shivering children was a dry porch and a decision. Here's what a man does after 32 years of taking responsibility for other people's children in worse weather than this. He doesn't shrug and shut the door. He doesn't load strange kids into his truck and improvise, because he knows exactly how that looks and exactly how wrong it can go. And he doesn't stand around hoping the problem evaporates. For 20 minutes, by his own account, Colonel Reeves worked a problem on that porch like it was a stalled convoy. Father's phone dark. Mother's phone dark. Grandparents, no number. Aunt, no number either. Zoe offered what she had. She does risk at Meridian downtown. He left me a voicemail I wouldn't hear for hours. His voice as calm as a man reading coordinates. When those 20 minutes were up and every reasonable civilian option had been exhausted, he did the thing he was built to do. He called it in. Not 911 with sirens and lights, but the Cobb County non-emergency line, which he'd saved in his phone the week he moved in, because of course he had. I've heard the recording. The whole county has better things to archive. But I asked Detective Alvarez to let me listen once, and I will hear that voice for the rest of my life. This is Colonel Darnell Reeves, United States Marine Corps, retired. I have 2 unaccompanied minors at my residence, dropped by taxi. Parents are unreachable and out of state. Children are safe with me on the porch. I need an officer in family services. No lights, no rush. That's it. That was the single phone call my brother never saw coming. No anger. No drama. Just procedure. That was the one force of nature my family had never once met. For 30 years, I had stood between them and the consequences, absorbing the impact, softening the edges, fixing what broke, and billing nobody for the damage. But there was no one standing in the doorway anymore. There was only the doorway. The rest of that morning unfolded the way institutions unfold, slowly. Then all at once, under a mountain of paperwork. A patrol officer arrived at 9:20 and took in the scene. 2 towel-wrapped kids eating graham crackers, a retired colonel standing calmly on the porch, and a doorbell camera blinking above all of it. A family services caseworker named Ms. Okafor arrived within the hour, crouched to Caleb's eye level, and admired Bruce the dinosaur with complete professional sincerity. Dispatch contacted City Star Cab. The company pulled the trip sheet and found Gus, who confirmed everything before his shift even ended. Cash fare, 2 minors, no adult at the pickup destination, and a father who said their aunt was expecting them. The officer ran the address history. The county ran me. That's the part people don't think about. I wasn't hiding from anyone with a badge. I was only hiding from my relatives. And a records clerk found, in 40 minutes, what my own mother hadn't noticed in 4 months. 2 calls went to my silenced phone, sitting in a drawer beneath a coffee mug. Meanwhile, Zoe sat very straight on my old porch swing. The officer told me this later, and it's the detail that still gets me. She answered every question in full sentences, kept her brother's hand in hers, and managed to be 9 years old and still the most responsible Stanton at the scene by a comfortable margin. At noon, my phone rang. I called the number back from my kitchen counter while rain streamed down the window. A woman answered on the second ring. "Miss Stanton? Detective Alvarez, Cobb County. Do you know a Zoe and Caleb Stanton?" "Yes. They're safe. They're at 4128 Maplewood Court. I think you'd better come out here." The floor tilted very quietly beneath everything I thought I owned. I told her I could be there in 25 minutes and drove into the storm. There is no manual for parking across the street from your own house. The magnolia I'd planted was dark with rain. The porch light I'd wired glowed for somebody else. I crossed the yard I'd once mowed, climbed 3 steps I could have climbed blindfolded, and stood on my own welcome mat like a visitor. Before I touched the bell, the door opened. The colonel had seen me coming, the way he apparently saw everything coming. Caleb hit me at knee height and held on like weather. Zoe approached more slowly, studying my face first, checking whether I was about to become one more adult she'd have to manage. Then she folded into my side, without saying a word. Over their heads, Detective Alvarez introduced herself, flipped a page, and asked the question that divided the rest of my life into before and after. "Miss Stanton, were you expecting these children today?" I want to be honest about that moment, because this is the part I'd want someone to be honest with me about. I saw the exit. One yes. One tiny, merciful yes. I could have called it a misunderstanding. I could have said my brother was hopeless with dates, that we'd talked about it, that somehow the communication had gotten crossed. The machinery around that porch would have powered down immediately. No report. No investigation. Maybe no consequences. I could have carried the whole thing on my back, just as I'd carried 30 years of smaller versions, and buried it somewhere quiet. The yes was right there in my mouth, warm and familiar, tasting like every Thanksgiving I'd ever cooked. Then I looked at Zoe's wet braid. I remembered my final text, still sitting in the phone in my pocket, and I said, "No." I refused 3 times in writing. Alvarez wrote it down without looking up. Ms. Okafor asked if I'd take the children while the situation was resolved. I said yes instantly, because the kids were never the burden. The burden was everything that had been bolted onto them. They called it a kinship placement. There was a background check, signatures, a caseworker walkthrough of my condo, and by 7 that evening, there were grilled cheese sandwiches and cartoons playing in a home my family didn't even know existed. Caleb was asleep by 8:30, with Bruce the dinosaur standing guard on his pillow. Zoe helped me wash the dishes because she is constitutionally incapable of being a guest. Somewhere between the plates, she asked without looking at me, "Why didn't you tell us you moved?" There are questions that are really doors, and behind that one was a hallway I wasn't ready to enter. I gave her something true, but useless about grown-up problems. She nodded the way children nod when they've noticed you flinch. She dried her hands, then delivered the second question as casually as if she were asking what was for breakfast. "Dad said you'd never say no for real. He says your no's are just how you warm up." She said it without cruelty. That was the horror of it. She wasn't accusing me. She was repeating a fact she had learned about me. In my family's world, my no had never meant no. It had always meant, Keep asking until she gives in. And now a 9-year-old girl knew it too. She said it like a fact she'd been handed with her cereal. One more law of the universe. Water is wet. Tuesdays are library days. Aunt Kendra's no means keep pushing. The machine wasn't just running me anymore. It was already training her, teaching a 9-year-old girl by demonstration exactly how much a woman's refusal was worth in our family, which was to say nothing. A coupon. An opening bid. I tucked her in and sat on my balcony in the wet darkness for a long time. For 2 more days, the ocean kept my brother safe from his own phone while his children slept down my hall, and a county file with his name on it quietly thickened on a desk in Marietta. Monday afternoon, the ship reached Nassau, and 40 minutes after the gangway touched the pier, my phone rang. 19 missed calls were waiting for Darren when his phone finally found a signal. Mine, Brianna's mother's, and a Cobb County number that had left instructions. He didn't call the detective first. He didn't call his children. He called me. And the first words out of my brother's mouth are burned into my memory. What did you do? Not, are the kids okay? Not, oh my God, what happened? Just, what did you do? 10 days of his own decisions had finally landed on him, and his instinct, sharpened by a lifetime of soft landings, was to locate the person whose job was supposed to absorb the impact. I stood on my balcony and kept my voice level. You should try asking what happened before you land. He came apart in pieces. First bluster, then bargaining, then the voice he'd used at 9 years old when he'd broken a window. It was a misunderstanding. I obviously would have never. Then he asked, what charge? Behind him, sharp as glass even through cheap ship Wi-Fi, I heard Brianna. Darren, look at me. She never said yes. And I understood that 2 investigations had just opened on that boat, and only one of them involved the police. The detective had told him, politely, that he needed to present himself in Georgia. The cruise line's refund policy told him the rest. They flew out of Nassau the next morning, seats bought at desperation prices. I did the arithmetic I do for a living and found it almost elegant. The man who spent $4,800 to escape a babysitting fee was now paying panic prices to fly home into a warrant. Quick pause, because I can practically hear some of you yelling at your screens. Put yourself on that porch with Detective Alvarez for 1 second. One little yes from you, and your family's entire problem evaporates. One honest no, and your brother lands in handcuffs. Which word would you have said? Truly. Be honest with me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we're just getting to the part where my mother slides a piece of paper across a kitchen table. Tuesday, July 15th, was supposed to be my exam day. Instead, I deferred my seat to the August sitting, the first cost of all this that could actually be measured in dollars. I was pouring cereal for Caleb when Darren's flight touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson. 2 officers were waiting on the jet bridge. The warrant had been signed the day before. He was facing misdemeanor charges related to abandonment of a dependent child and contributing to the deprivation of a minor, built on a foundation my brother had poured himself. The driver's statement, the trip sheet, the colonel's doorbell camera recording the cab pulling away into the rain, and the timestamps. Those quiet little assassins. A cab dispatched at 7:38. A text to me at 7:41. He had told me after the wheels were already rolling, then made himself unreachable for days. Intent, the law calls that. Tuesday, my family called it something else. That same afternoon, my mother drove past Maplewood Court. She said she wanted to feel close to the situation. What she actually saw was a gray pickup in my old driveway and a small Marine Corps flag beside the door. She called me from the curb, and I will give her this. She has a gift for compression. 2 sentences, and the entire family cosmology snapped into place. You sold the house. You let a stranger arrest your brother. I stood very still and admired the engineering. In one breath, the sale of my own property had become a betrayal. A retired Marine answering his own doorbell had become my hired accomplice. And Darren, who had shipped his children across a county to an unverified address, and then gone dark, had somehow been arrested by me. Grammar is destiny in my family. The verbs always find their way to my name. I said, Mom, ask me how the kids are. She hung up. The family group chat is called Stanton Strong. That night, it earned the name. 84 messages between dinner and midnight, and I read every one standing in my kitchen while the kids slept, watching my trial unfold in a courtroom where I had no seat. Aunt Renee opened proceedings. Blood doesn't call the police on blood. Period. A cousin I hadn't seen since a funeral supply case law. She could have just taken the kids. Her niece and nephew. My mother posted a photograph of Darren at his high school graduation, which is apparently what passes for exculpatory evidence. My father posted nothing, which in that chat is a verdict, too. Here's what nobody posted. Not once. A question about the children. Whether Zoe was sleeping okay. Whether Caleb was scared. Whether two kids who had stood in the rain on a stranger's porch might need anything at all from this enormous, concerned family. The kids weren't the story. The kids were props in the story of what I had supposedly done to Darren. 2 messages did come to me privately. The first was from Brianna, and I've kept it. He told me you said yes. He told his lawyer that, too, until the texts came out. I'm so sorry. The kids ask about you. The one honest adult on that side of the ledger. And she'd married in. Not one drop of Stanton blood, which was starting to feel less like a coincidence and more like a diagnosis. The second was a phone call from my father that lasted under a minute. Frank Stanton, a man of few words and fewer positions, said, "Your mother's heart is breaking, Kendra." That was it. 30 seconds of dial tone in my chest, where a question about my heart might have gone. The following Tuesday, my mother called with a voice I hadn't heard since childhood fevers. Warm, syrupy, mobilized. "Come for tea, baby. Just us." I drove the 30 minutes to Marietta, knowing full well that just us was a genre, not a guest list. Sure enough, my father's truck was in the driveway, and the good tablecloth was out. On the kitchen table, squared between the sugar bowl and a plate of shortbread, like it had a place setting of its own, sat a 3-page document with a tab printed by someone's lawyer marking where my signature would go. Darren's attorney had found the door out, and the door was me. The document claimed there had been a standing child care arrangement, an understanding reached in the spring that Aunt Kendra would take the kids. And if I had then moved without informing the family, well, then nobody had abandoned anyone. It was all just a tragic mix-up between siblings. The charges would soften or evaporate, and everyone would get their life back. All it required was for me to swear under oath to 2 lies, that I had said yes when I had said no 3 times in writing, and that the secret I'd kept for my own survival had been the negligence that caused it all. My mother poured tea and slid the pages across the table with 2 fingers, gently, the way you'd push a gift. 1 signature, baby. You could fix this whole family with 1 sentence. I looked at the tab marking the line where my name was supposed to go. I price risk for a living, and I had never in my career seen an instrument like it. A policy where I paid every premium, absorbed every loss, and the beneficiary was the very hazard being insured. I didn't touch it, but God help me. I didn't say no yet either. I said I'd read it. You should know, I almost signed it. 3 nights later, at 3 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen counter with the affidavit open on my laptop, and did the thing I had done my entire life. I started drafting the version where I absorbed it. I actually typed it out. The spring conversation that never happened. The yes I never gave. And it flowed because I'd been ghostwriting this family's alibi since I was 12. Then I opened my texts and read my own final answer, dated July 5th. And underneath the ache, I felt my profession clear its throat. Look at the exposure, Kendra. His charges were misdemeanors. False statements under oath in Georgia could be a felony. The math wasn't subtle. They were asking me to trade a possible probation sentence for him against a possible prison sentence for me. My license, my career, my name, and calling that trade family. I deleted the draft, and sitting there in the dark, I finally let myself replay the call I'd taken the night of his arrest, the automated recording from the county jail, my brother waiting on bond, my thumb hovering for a long second before I accepted the call. That night, for the first time in 37 years, Darren had spoken to me without charm, in a voice with a crack straight down the middle. Nobody ever let me fail, Kay. Not once. Do you understand that? I didn't know a no could be real. I had sat with my hand over my mouth, exactly the way I was sitting now. It was the truest sentence he'd ever said to me, and the most frightening. The most damning thing anyone had ever said about our family. And he'd meant it as an excuse. He wasn't a monster. He was a man raised on a diet of rescues, staring at consequence like it was a species he'd read about but never seen. I heard him. I even believed him. And I had not offered to catch him. Hanging up felt like setting down something I carried for so long that my arms had forgotten they were arms. I needed one conversation with a human being who shared no blood with anyone in this story. So, Saturday morning, I drove to Maplewood Court and knocked on my old door on purpose for the first time. Colonel Reeves didn't act surprised. He brought out 2 mugs of coffee, and we sat on the porch, him in a rocker, me on the swing I'd hung for Zoe, which he'd left exactly where it was. I apologized for dragging a stranger into my family's mess, and he looked genuinely puzzled by the shape of the sentence. "Ma'am, I didn't unleash anything. I just answered the door." He let that sit, then walked me through his 20 minutes on that porch like an after-action review. The calls, the voicemail, the decision not to defend himself, because it never occurred to him that he needed defending. He could see I needed the timeline of the day my family broke, narrated by somebody with no stake in the myth. Then he told me one thing about himself, unprompted, over the rim of his mug. He had a son. There had been a stretch during his son's 30th year, money and worse, when everyone told him to step in, wire the money, make the calls, catch the boy. "Hardest order I ever gave myself was stand down," he said. "My wife didn't speak to me for a month." He took a long sip. He runs an aircraft hangar in Pensacola now. Calls me every Sunday. He didn't tell me what to do. Men like that don't. He handed me a single data point from the far side of the exact canyon I was standing in and let me do my own math. When I left, the affidavit was still in my bag, unsigned. The family meeting, though the summons hadn't officially come yet, was 8 days out, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I could feel assembling. The summons came Thursday by phone in my mother's chairwoman voice. Sunday, 2 o'clock, the whole family. My house. And Kendra, bring your signature or don't bother coming at all. There it was, finally out loud. The price tag my whole childhood had been trying to read. My seat at that table had never been furniture. It was a lease. The rent was due, and the rent was me. My father got on the line for exactly 1 sentence, the longest speech he'd given all year. "Your mother needs this, Kendra." Her need is peace, Darren's freedom, everyone's arithmetic on the table except mine. And as ever, not one word about the 2 smallest people in the family, as if the case were about a scheduling mix-up and not children in the rain. I hung up and looked at my calendar. We're 2 appointments now set stacked on consecutive days, like a controlled experiment. Sunday, 2 p.m. Family meeting, Marietta. Monday, 9:30 a.m. Interview with the district attorney's office, where Detective Alvarez had asked me to confirm my statement for the file. 2 tables, 2 days apart. On one of them, I could say the sentence my mother wanted. On the other, I would say the sentence that was true. The same mouth could not visit both. I did what I do at work when a client is about to make a catastrophic decision. Politely, I stopped arguing with the weather and started modeling it. I put the affidavit in my bag, unsigned, because you carry the exhibit. You don't become it. I spent Friday being extremely good at my job, and Saturday, I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and ran the last risk assessment I would ever run for the Stanton family. 2 columns, 1 legal pad, my whole life. Column A, I sign. Darren walks. My mother hugs me at Thanksgiving and tells the story, forever, about how the family closed ranks. And underneath, in the fine print where I live, a felony writes my name like a lien that never expires. My career becomes 1 records request away from ash, and a 9-year-old girl downstream of it all learns her final lesson on the subject. Aunt Kendra's no melts in the end, exactly like Dad always said it would. A woman's refusal in this family is a bluff. You simply have to wait it out. Outlast. Column B, I don't sign. The truth stands where the colonel left it, in the doorway. My brother eats the misdemeanor he cooked for himself, and I lose the table. Not dramatically. Nobody would post a banishment notice, but I knew the mechanics. The Sunday invitations would simply stop. The story would calcify with me as the villain, and my mother's voice would become something I remembered instead of something I heard. I sat there a long time looking for column C. I'm good at column C. I've spent my entire life building column C for other people out of my own hours, my own savings, my own address. There was no column C this time. That's what made it the first honest decision the Stanton family had faced in decades. It had a price no matter who paid. And for once the question was only whether the bill would finally go to the person who'd run up the tab. I put down the pen. To my surprise, I slept like a stone. Sunday at 2 o'clock exactly, I knocked on the door of the house I grew up in. 11 people were already seated. The paper lay in the middle of the table, like a knife set for dinner. They had staged it with real care, and I noticed the staging the way you notice a rigged scale. The photo albums were out and open. Darren's christening, Darren's graduation, the two of us at the lake in matching windbreakers, age 9 and 6, which is a coincidence of numbers I refused to believe my mother missed. Zoe and Caleb were not there. They had been sent to a neighbor's because this was grown folks' business, which tells you everything about how my family defines the phrase, since the entire case was about 2 children the grown folks had misplaced. 11 people ringed that living room. My parents, Aunt Renee with her reading glasses on and printouts in her lap, cousins deployed on the couch like jurors, Darren out on bond, scrubbed and contrite in a collared shirt I'd bet money his lawyer chose, and Brianna sitting apart near the window with her purse on her lap, like a woman at a bus stop deciding on a destination. The pen was already on the table, parallel to the affidavit, 1 inch of ceremonial distance between them. My mother opened with the albums, a guided tour of everything we supposedly owed each other, narrated in her softest voice. Then Darren stood and read an apology from his phone. It was smooth. It ran almost 2 minutes, and if you grafted it the way I did, every sentence bent to the same load-bearing beam. I'm sorry you felt unheard. I'm sorry this got so big, but we both know. Then he looked up and gave me the smile that had closed car sales across 3 counties. We both know you were always going to say yes. You're you. The room actually murmured in agreement, warm as a church. That was the pitch. My own reliability, 30 years of it, was being offered back to me as evidence that my refusal had never been real. It was like presenting the fire department as proof there had never been any danger. I sat with my hands folded and let the silence get expensive. Then my mother slid the paper the last 12 inches, and the room leaned in. I didn't raise my voice. I want that on the record. Whatever else the family says about that afternoon, because the room got loud and none of the loud was mine. I took out my phone, opened the thread, and read aloud. Dates first, like citations. June 26th. I am not available to watch the kids July 11th through the 19th. July 1st. The same with my exam date. July 5th. This is my final answer. Then I set the phone face up beside the pen. Those were sent before he ever bought a cab ride. The detective has them. The DA has them. You've all had 30 years of me. You know I document. My mother's hand covered the affidavit like a woman shielding a candle. I kept my voice at kitchen table volume. You are asking me to swear under oath that my no was a yes. His charges are misdemeanors. Lying in that document is a felony. You want to trade his probation for my prison and call the exchange rate family. Aunt Renee started to say, blood, and I let the word hang there, unfed. Then my mother broke, really broke, her voice. My mother's voice climbed to somewhere I'd never heard it. 1 sentence, Kendra. You could fix all of it with 1 sentence. And there it was, the family thesis stated cleanly at last. Any wreckage, any size, and the repair was always 1 more sentence from me. 1 more yes from the department of me. I stood up. My knees held. For 34 years, my no had been an opening bid in this family. It stopped being won on a porch in the rain. I looked at Darren, who was staring at the carpet. I've done the math on what this costs me. I'm the only person in this room who ever does the math. I know exactly what I'm losing today, and I am not signing. I picked up my bag. Behind me, my mother's voice went flat and final, the coldest I'd ever heard it. If you walk out that door, don't come back Sunday. Any Sunday. I stopped in the doorway of the house I grew up in, the last doorway that had never once been mine, and gave the truest answer of my life. I know, Mom. I priced it in. Then I walked through it into the afternoon, and the door I heard close behind me was so much quieter than I'd spent 3 decades fearing it would be. Monday, 9:30 a.m. I sat in a conference room with county carpet and coffee I didn't drink. Detective Alvarez, an assistant district attorney. My statement in a folder, and me. It took 40 minutes. I confirmed everything. The dates, the screenshots, the 3 refusals in writing. No childcare arrangement, no misunderstanding. And the text sent after the cab was already rolling. When they asked if I wanted to add anything, I said one thing for the record, and I meant every word of it. I'm not here to bury my brother. I'm declining to lie for him. Those are different jobs, and I've retired from both. The ADA almost smiled. Then I asked my only question, the one nobody at that Sunday table had asked out loud, not even once. What happens to the children's file? Ms. Okafor's report, they told me. Safety plan in place. Kids stable with their mother. Case on track to close if it held. Kids doing fine. Kids asking to see their aunt. I signed where signing was true and walked out into the July sunlight feeling neither triumphant nor destroyed, but accurate. The way a ledger feels when it finally balances after years of somebody cooking the books. In the parking garage, I did the last piece of business. I opened Stanton Strong. 84 messages of my own trial were still hanging there unanswered. I scrolled to the bottom and pressed the button the app keeps in the corner for exactly this. Leave group. No speech. No parting shot. 34 years of standing between my family and every consequence they'd ever ordered. And my old life didn't end with thunder or a slammed door. It ended in a concrete stairwell with one tap, quieter than a text arriving. It ended the way the truth arrives. Somebody just answers the door. In September, Darren took the deal his lawyer built once the affidavit strategy died on my mother's table. Guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of contributing to the deprivation of a minor, 12 months of probation, a parenting course, and 80 hours of court-ordered community service. Some of it at a youth shelter. The universe writes its own jokes. No jail beyond the night of the jet bridge. He kept custody. Ms. Okafor's safety plan is running through its 6 quiet months and is on track to close clean, which I genuinely count as good news, because whatever else is true, Zoe and Caleb love their father. The dealership was less forgiving than the court. You cannot run a sales floor while on probation for a crime with the word minor in it. Corporate made its decision. Darren came off management, and the pay cut had teeth. My parents covered his legal bills, $9,000, I heard through Brianna, which broke my heart in a way I'd stopped expecting. Even after all of it, the reflex held. Catch him. Always catch him. And mail the lesson to whoever's paying attention, because it was never going to be him. The force I grew up under didn't die that summer. It just lost one particular address. As for me, my mother kept her word, which I respected in a bleak sort of way. No more Sundays. The invitations simply stopped, exactly the way I'd modeled on my legal pad. And at church, her version traveled well. The daughter who chose strangers over blood. But on the last Saturday of September, Brianna texted me a park name and a time. No committee. No permission slip. Caleb brought Bruce. Zoe brought the chessboard. And I brought nothing at all for once in my life. Except one thing I'd already set in motion that nobody at that Sunday table knew about. They still don't. You're about to. The week after I left the group chat, I sat down with the attorney who'd handled my closing and moved a piece of the Maplewood money, somewhere my family's, weather could never reach. 2 529 education accounts, one for Zoe and one for Caleb, funded from a sale of the house my grandmother had called communal, with an automatic $200 contribution to each account every month, drafted on the same day Meridian pays me. Brianna is the only adult on that side who knows, and she carries the secret on one condition, my only term in the entire arrangement. The grandparents never hear about it. That condition isn't spite. It's engineering. The moment my mother learns there's a fund, it becomes the family's fund, and then it becomes leverage. And I've watched what this family does with shared resources my entire life. I was the shared resource. This money doesn't negotiate. It doesn't attend Sunday dinner. It just compounds quietly, the way consequences do. And there's one more line item in the front pocket of Zoe's backpack, laminated so a 9-year-old who checks things can always check it. A card with my number and a promise in plain block letters. If you are ever stranded, call this number. A car will come. Aunt Kay. She's used it once so far. Not stranded. She called to report a chess opening she'd found on YouTube. The car came anyway. We got milkshakes. That's the whole story of the fund. Love converted from something they could bill against into something I get to give. It's October now. Most Sunday mornings, you can find me on a porch in Smyrna that used to be mine, drinking coffee with a retired colonel who charges no rent for it and never mentions the debt, because there isn't one. He never lets me thank him past the first attempt. I just answered the door, he says, waving it off as he rocks. I passed the August exam. The plate on my office door now says Director of Risk, and the first frame thing I hung was nothing from Maplewood at all. It's a crayon drawing of a porch in the rain that Zoe made for me, with a stick figure holding an umbrella over two smaller ones. And if she meant the colonel or meant me, I've decided never to ask. My phone stays quiet most weekends. There was a time when that particular silence would have had me pacing, running scenarios, drafting apologies for storms I hadn't caused. In my family, silence was never peace. I told you that at the beginning, and it was true my whole life. It isn't true anymore. These days, the quiet is just quiet. Weather, off duty, a no at rest. Here is what I finally understand, and it only costs everything to learn. Nobody ever let my brother fail, so he never learned to stand, and everybody let me carry. So I never learned I was allowed to set things down. And family, it turns out, was never simply the people who share your blood. Family is the people who hear your no the first time you say it, and who would rather stand beside you in the rain than send you out into it. That's my story. 3 no's in writing, 1 taxi in the rain, 1 phone call from a stranger who owed me nothing and still gave my niece and nephew a dry porch. If someone in your life treats your no like an opening bid, take this as your sign to stop negotiating. Share this video with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment below. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.